little bit about Chinese rock music in my presentation. So before I really get into Chinese rock music, I kind of wanted to talk about the music of China as an introduction. So China is almost 5,000 years old, so it has a lot of different types of music and a lot of history with music, so it's kind of hard to sum it all up into one slide. Bamboo aerophones are the instruments that I believe most Americans associate with traditional Chinese music, such as the dizi, which I'll be talking about later on in my presentation. Regions with different dialects have different singing traditions because they have different tones, because Chinese is a tonal language. And in the late 20th century, we saw a lot more Western-influenced styles of music become popular, such as pop and rock music in China. So as I mentioned in my last slide, the dizi is a Chinese aerophone constructed from bamboo, and it is a very high-pitched, flute-like instrument, in my opinion, that I think most Americans would commonly associate with traditional Chinese music. So hopefully that is a good example of what the dizi sounds like, and I just kind of wanted to play it for everybody so you could listen for it when I play my song further on in the presentation, because it is an instrument that is present. So, for some cultural context around Chinese rock music, Mao Zedong died in 1976 and was replaced by Deng Xiaoping, who was more moderate. And since this happened, the Chinese economy has shifted to embrace more foreign investors and capitalist economic policies. And under Mao's administration, China was very isolated from the West, so there wasn't a lot of Western influence on Chinese music and Chinese culture up until around the 1980s. As well as this, a lot of young people were very frustrated by the changing political landscape because there was a lot of large economic and social changes going on in China at the time, and a lot of young people felt very left behind and abandoned. So, the emergence of Chinese rock music. In the 1980s and 90s, Chinese rock music became very popular due to increasing Western influence on Chinese culture, as well as dissatisfaction with the government, because a lot of young activists were very frustrated by what was going on, and this kind of Chinese rock music kind of became an outlet for them. It has origins in the Northwest Wind style of music, which I talk about more in the study guide, and that is based in traditional folk Chinese traditions. So this is just a New York Times article that I found that I thought was very interesting about Chinese rock music, and it's just kind of about the political factors that helped Chinese rock music emerge in the 1900s or the 1980s. And one thing that I think is really interesting to note is that to an American's ears, Chinese rock music sounds a lot more like pop music. And I just wanted to share because I thought this was a neat article that was written around the time that Chinese rock music would have been coming out. So, like I said, there is a very big stylistic gap between American rock music and Chinese rock music, and this is because rock music is based on a lot of Black American music types such as R&B, soul, or funk, and there's a large lack of knowledge about these types of music among Chinese rock musicians, which is partially due to limited contact with that Chinese youth had with Black Americans, but also because China has a long history of ethnocentrism and racism. So, since most Chinese rock music draws from white influences rather than Black music influences, there is going to be a stylistic gap that is impossible to fully bridge. So Chinese rock music was born in Beijing, that's Tiananmen Square behind in the picture. In the 1980s, it was mostly live performances in small bars and hotels, and it was like a very underground kind of fringe scene. Sui Jian is the artist that I am going to be talking about in this presentation, and he is known as the father of Chinese rock. He really emphasized individuality and self-expression, and his music drew on folk and traditional music types such as the Northwest Wind, Xi Bei Feng, peasant songs of Shanxi, as well as Western rock artists. And that's a picture of him in the corner. So the song that I chose to listen to today is called Nothing to My Name, and some things I want people to listen for are the counter melody created by an aerophone, which is the dizi that I showed you guys in the second slide, or the third slide, and kind of the way he uses volume. He actually performs his music very loud as a form of protest against the government because there were policies about like music performance and volume, and kind of just the mix of traditional Chinese instruments and Western instruments such as an electric guitar, and also the stylistic differences between Western and Chinese rock. So this is the song Nothing to My Name, and it became really popular after he performed it at the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests, which I wrote more about in the study guide, which is very interesting. And that's when asked about his experience, he said that if you were there, it felt like a big party. There was no fear. It was nothing like it was shown on CNN or the BBC. And I thought that was just interesting because it was documenting his experience at these protests and kind of just what he lived. And this song became an unofficial anthem of the protest movement afterwards. So that is a clip of the song, and that's kind of where the song starts to pick up and kind of change pace, and you can notice that he gets a lot more, his volume increases and he gets a lot more fast paced. So this song tells the story of a poor boy pleading his girlfriend to accept his love even though he has nothing. And the lyrics are in your study or listening guide, by the way. If you want to go look at those, they're translated to English. So Sui Jian insists that the song has no political meaning, but it really became a political anthem. And when asked about it, he was kind of saying when they sang the song, it was as if they were expressing what they felt. And he was kind of saying that like he didn't want to tell you how to feel about the song, and he was glad that people were picking up their own meaning from it, which goes back into how he really emphasized individualism and more individual rights. And the song really conveys the youth's disillusionment with the government and the changing times, but it was also a hopeful song which really captured the political atmosphere of Chinese youth at this time. So the song was very well received by the youth. It was seen as a protest anthem, and it is also widely regarded as the first Chinese rock song, and is credited as the song that shot Chinese rock music into popularity in the 90s. So it was well received by young people and by kind of popular culture, but it was not well received by the Chinese government, and Sui Jian was banned from performing in 1990 shortly after the protests, and there was kind of a push to keep Chinese rock music more underground after this. So the significance of this song and Chinese rock music in general is that Chinese rock artists were agents of change, as described by Wu Er Kaishi, who was a student protest leader. He said that the people who are most influential among young people are not the intellectuals, but they're singers like Sui Jian. And these rock songs and these artists really served as a form of political protest for these young people and were very important culturally.